Dr. Jae-ho Park stood behind the thick reinforced glass wall, watching the most dangerous 12-year-old girl on Earth complete her daily combat training. His coffee had gone cold in his hands an hour ago, but he could not look away from what they had created. Subject 7 moved through the training course like death itself had learned to walk. The simulation room was designed to test every possible combat scenario: urban warfare, close quarters fighting, long-range targeting, and hand-to-hand combat against multiple opponents. Most adult soldiers would struggle to complete even half of the challenges. Subject 7 made it look easy. She rolled behind a concrete barrier as simulated gunfire erupted around her. The sound was deafening even through the soundproof glass, but her expression never changed. No fear, no excitement, no emotion at all. She simply calculated angles, distances, and timing with the cold efficiency of a computer. 3 holographic enemies appeared to her left. Subject 7 moved before they could fire, her body flowing like water as she eliminated each target with precise strikes. Her small hands, which should have been holding toys or drawing pictures, instead wielded training weapons with deadly skill. Her neural conditioning is now complete, reported lead scientist Hae-jin Lee, looking up from her bank of monitoring equipment. The computers showed brain scans, heart rate data, and dozens of other biological measurements that tracked every aspect of Subject 7's performance. Dr. Lee was a brilliant woman who had once worked to help children with learning disabilities. Now she used that same knowledge to modify young minds in ways that would have been considered impossible just 5 years ago. The war had changed everything, including what decent people were willing to do to survive. Empathy centers have been successfully suppressed, Lee continued, reading from her screens. Pain receptors have been modified to reduce distraction during combat. Tactical processing abilities have been enhanced beyond normal human levels. Colonel Minute Ho Kim nodded grimly as he watched Subject 7 complete the final phase of her simulation. She was now fighting opponents that moved faster than any human could naturally move, and she was winning. The girl who should have been in middle school was instead the most lethal fighter their military had ever produced. The synthesis project requires perfect weapons, Kim said quietly. The approaching Devour fleet consumes consciousness itself. Normal soldiers become empty shells within minutes of exposure. We need fighters who can resist that effect. Through the glass, they could see Subject 7 finish her training session. She had completed every challenge without injury, without hesitation, and without showing any sign of the humanity she had once possessed. She stood perfectly still, waiting for her next instruction with the patience of a machine. Subject 7 had no real name anymore. She had no identity beyond her designation as the 7th successful subject in their weapons program. She had been taken from her family when she was 6 years old, along with 49 other children who showed the right combination of intelligence, physical capability, and psychological flexibility. The scientists had spent years carefully removing everything that made her human while keeping everything that made her an effective killer. They had erased her memories of parents, friends, favorite foods, and bedtime stories. They had suppressed her ability to feel love, fear, joy, or sadness. They had transformed a normal child into a living weapon designed to fight beings that conventional military forces could not even touch. Complete emotional suppression confirmed, added Dr. So-young Choi, the project's chief psychologist. Dr. Choi had once specialized in helping traumatized children recover from terrible experiences. Now she specialized in creating trauma that would turn children into something no longer quite human. No emotional attachments detected, Choi continued, checking her psychological evaluation reports. No fear responses that might interfere with combat effectiveness. No hesitation that might slow reaction times. She is exactly what we designed, a human-shaped killing machine. The other scientists nodded with satisfaction, but Dr. Park felt only sadness as he watched Subject 7 through the glass. They had succeeded beyond their wildest hopes. They had created the perfect soldier to fight humanity's most dangerous enemy. But the cost of that success was a 12-year-old girl who no longer remembered how to smile. Subject 7 stood at attention, waiting for her handlers to retrieve her from the training room. Her breathing was steady, her posture perfect, her eyes focused but empty. She looked like a normal child, but everyone who worked on the project knew that normal children did not exist behind those eyes anymore. But Dr. Park was wrong about one thing. Deep within Subject 7's carefully conditioned mind, buried beneath layers of psychological modification and neural programming, something remained that the scientists had failed to completely eliminate. It was small, fragile, and hidden so deep that their instruments could not detect it. It was the tiny spark of who she had been before the training began. A fragment of memory that had somehow survived all their attempts to erase it completely. Sometimes, In the moments between sleeping and waking, Subject 7 could almost remember a woman's voice singing a gentle lullaby. She could not remember who the woman was or what the song meant, but the memory existed like a secret flame that refused to be extinguished. The scientists believed they had created the perfect weapon. They believed they had successfully removed every trace of the child who had once existed. They were wrong. The humanity they thought they had destroyed was only sleeping, waiting for the right moment to remember what it meant to be human. The alarm sirens had been screaming for 3 hours when the Devour fleet finally emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. The entire human defense network had been waiting for this moment, but nothing could have prepared them for what they actually saw on their tactical displays. The enemy ships were not ships in any sense that human minds could understand. They appeared to be made of living darkness that bent light around itself, creating shapes that hurt to look at directly. The vessels moved in patterns that defied physics, appearing in multiple locations simultaneously while somehow remaining single entities. But the truly terrifying part was not how the ships looked or moved. It was what they did to everything they encountered. 3 outer colonies have gone completely dark, reported Communications Officer HYO Jungnam, her voice shaking as she read from her instruments. No distress signals, no evacuation attempts, no signs of struggle. They're just gone. Director Yong-Soo-on stood in the command center of Earth Defense Headquarters, watching the tactical displays with growing horror. He was a career military officer who had seen combat on a dozen different worlds, but nothing had prepared him for this kind of enemy. "What do you mean, gone?" he asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. "Sir, our deep space reconnaissance drones reached the Proxima colony 15 minutes ago. The buildings are intact, the infrastructure is undamaged, but there are no people. No bodies, no signs of evacuation, no evidence that anyone ever lived there." The truth was worse than extinction. The Devour fleet did not just kill their victims, they consumed consciousness itself, leaving behind empty shells of people who had never existed. Buildings remained, but no one could remember who had built them. Equipment continued to function, but no one recalled who had operated it. Conventional weapons passed through them completely, added tactical analyst Jin Woo-oh, reviewing combat reports from the first military units that had attempted to engage the enemy. Energy weapons, projectile weapons, nuclear warheads, nothing has any effect. They exist partially outside normal spacetime. Colonel Minute Ho Kim entered the command center carrying files that contained humanity's only hope of survival. 4 to 9 subjects are ready for immediate deployment, he announced. All modifications have been completed and tested. Subject 7 shows the highest combat effectiveness ratings. The subjects were waiting in the deployment bay, standing in perfect formation like statues that breathed. They wore simple black uniforms without insignia or identification. They carried no visible weapons because they had been modified to be weapons themselves. Subject 7 stood among them, indistinguishable from her fellow modified humans except for the small number tattooed behind her left ear. She was slightly taller than some of the others, with dark hair cut short for practical reasons and eyes that reflected no light or emotion. Their modified neural patterns should resist the consciousness-draining effects that have made conventional forces useless, Dr. Park explained to the assembled military commanders. We have suppressed the portions of their minds that the enemy appears to target for consumption. The logic was simple and terrible. If the Devourers consumed human consciousness, then the solution was to create humans who no longer possessed consciousness in any recognizable form. The subjects had been stripped of everything that made them psychologically human while retaining their physical capabilities. "You are humanity's only hope," Dr. Park told the assembled subjects during their final briefing. His words carried across the deployment bay, but none of the modified children showed any reaction to the weight of responsibility being placed on their shoulders. They received their mission parameters with mechanical attention, processing tactical information like computers downloading data. Target locations, enemy capabilities, extraction procedures, everything was absorbed and categorized without emotional response. But as the transport ships prepared for departure, something unexpected happened to Subject 7. She was standing in the loading bay, waiting for her turn to board the military transport that would take her to the front lines, when a fragment of memory suddenly surfaced in her conditioned mind. It came without warning, slipping past the psychological barriers that should have prevented any personal recollections from surviving. A woman's voice singing a gentle lullaby. The melody was soft and warm, filled with love and tenderness that had no place in Subject 7's current existence. She could not see the woman's face or remember her name, but the voice was familiar in a way that made her chest feel strange. The memory lasted only a few seconds before her conditioning reasserted itself, pushing the fragment back into the depths of her modified psyche. Her training immediately identified the experience as a malfunction that required correction, and her mental processes automatically began suppressing the anomalous data. But the memory was not destroyed. It was only hidden again, waiting beneath the surface of her artificial consciousness like a seed that had not yet decided whether to grow. Subject 7 showed no outward sign of what had happened. Her posture remained perfect, her expression unchanged, her readiness for combat unaffected. She boarded her assigned transport ship and took her designated seat with the same mechanical precision as always. None of the scientists monitoring her vital signs detected anything unusual. Their instruments showed normal brain activity, steady heart rate, and optimal psychological stability. According to their measurements, Subject 7 remained a perfect weapon ready for deployment against humanity's greatest enemy. They were wrong, but they would not discover their mistake until it was far too late to change the outcome of the war. The first engagement with the Devour fleet took place in the ruins of what had once been the Titan research station. The massive orbital facility hung in space like a dead metal flower, its lights still functioning but no one left inside to remember who had built it or why. Subject 7's transport ship docked with the station's main airlock, and she stepped into an environment that would have driven normal soldiers insane within minutes. The air itself seemed wrong, filled with a presence that tried to reach into minds and pull out everything that made a person human. Combat Controller Ty-Minute O monitored the engagement from the command ship positioned safely outside the Devourer's consciousness-draining field. His screens showed vital signs and combat data from all 49 subjects as they spread throughout the station to engage the enemy. Subjects are engaging successfully, O reported to the fleet commanders. No signs of consciousness drain affecting our weapons. Repeat, the modified humans are showing complete resistance to enemy psychological attacks. The plan was working exactly as the scientists had hoped. The Devourers could not consume consciousness from minds that had been artificially stripped of most human awareness. The subjects moved through the station like efficient killing machines, encountering enemy entities that existed partially outside normal space and time. Subject 7 encountered her first Devourer in what had been the station's main laboratory. The creature was difficult to see directly, appearing as a shifting shadow that seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once. When it tried to drain her consciousness, it found only the cold, empty spaces where her emotions and memories should have been. She eliminated the entity with mechanical precision, using combat techniques that had been programmed into her nervous system. Her body moved without conscious thought, flowing through attack patterns that no normal 12-year-old could have performed. For 2 days, the engagement continued with perfect success. The subjects cleared deck after deck of the station, eliminating Devourers that conventional weapons could not even touch. They worked with coordinated efficiency, communicating through simple hand signals and pre-programmed tactical responses. Subject 7 showed no signs of fatigue, fear, or doubt as she moved through corridors filled with the remnants of human civilization. She stepped over personal belongings that no one could remember owning, past photographs of people who had never existed, through rooms where the furniture remained but the purpose had been forgotten. But on the 3rd day of combat operations, she encountered something that her conditioning had not prepared her to handle. She was clearing the station's residential section when she heard sounds coming from behind a sealed emergency door. The sounds were not made by Devourers, they were too organized, too purposeful. Someone was still alive inside. Subject 7 used her enhanced strength to force open the damaged door, expecting to find more enemies to eliminate. Instead, she found a small storage closet where 3 human beings had been hiding for days. "Please help us," whispered a terrified woman who was holding a small child against her chest. The woman was thin and dirty, obviously surviving on emergency rations and recycled water. They took everyone else. Everyone we knew just disappeared. Behind the woman cowered an elderly man who looked at Subject 7 with desperate hope. "Are you here to rescue us? Please tell me you're here to get us out of this place." The child in the woman's arms could not have been more than 4 years old. The little girl had large, frightened eyes that reminded Subject 7 of something she could not quite identify. The child was trying not to cry, pressing her face against her mother's shoulder. Subject 7's conditioning immediately provided clear guidance for this situation. Her mission was to eliminate Devourers and secure the station. Civilian casualties were acceptable losses if they interfered with primary objectives. These survivors were not part of her tactical parameters. The logical response was to ignore them and continue with her assigned tasks. Her programming demanded efficiency above all other considerations. She should move on to the next section of the station without wasting time or resources on irrelevant factors. But as Subject 7 looked at the small child, something unexpected happened in her modified mind. She heard the half-remembered lullaby again. the gentle melody that had somehow survived all attempts to erase it from her consciousness. The woman's voice singing softly, filled with the same protective love that she could see in the way this mother held her frightened daughter. For just a moment, the connection became clear. The voice in her memory belonged to someone who had once held her the same way. Someone who had sung to her when she was afraid, someone who had loved her before the scientists took that capacity away. The memory should have been suppressed immediately by her conditioning. Her training should have reasserted control and forced her to continue with the mission. But something had changed during the 3 days of combat. The psychological barriers that held her humanity in check had developed tiny cracks. For the first time since her conditioning began, Subject 7 made a choice that was not programmed into her neural pathways. Instead of leaving the civilians to whatever fate awaited them, she spoke. "Follow me," she said quietly. "I will get you to the evacuation point." It was a simple decision, but it represented something revolutionary. Subject 7 had chosen to value human life over mission efficiency. She had chosen compassion over programming. She had chosen to remember what it meant to protect the innocent rather than simply eliminate enemies. The scientists monitoring her vital signs from the command ship noticed nothing unusual. Her heart rate remained steady, her brain activity showed normal patterns, her combat effectiveness rating stayed optimal. They had no way of knowing that their perfect weapon had just taken the first step toward becoming human again. Subject 7 led the 3 survivors through the station's dangerous corridors, protecting them from devourers while completing her assigned mission objectives. But the small act of mercy had awakened something in her mind that would continue to grow until it could no longer be contained. Subject 7's decision to save the 3 civilians on Titan Research Station created changes in her mind that the scientists had never expected. Like cracks spreading through ice, her single act of mercy began to damage the careful psychological programming that had controlled her for 6 years. Dr. Haijin Lee was the first to notice something was wrong. She was monitoring Subject 7's brain activity during the post-mission medical evaluation when she saw patterns that should not have existed in a properly conditioned subject. "Subject 7 is showing anomalous neural activity," she reported to Dr. Park, her voice filled with concern. "The brain scans are indicating increased activity in areas that we specifically suppressed during conditioning." Dr. Park studied the medical readings with growing alarm. The areas lighting up on Subject 7's brain scan were the regions responsible for emotional processing, memory formation, and independent decision-making, all the parts of human consciousness that the Synthesis Project had worked so hard to eliminate. "Run the scans again," he ordered. "There must be some kind of equipment malfunction." But the second scan showed the same results. Subject 7's neural conditioning was not just failing, it was actively reversing itself. Suppressed memories were beginning to surface, bringing with them all the emotions and human responses that should have been permanently erased. The other subjects remained perfect weapons, showing no signs of psychological degradation. They continued to follow orders with mechanical precision, completing their missions without question or hesitation. But Subject 7 was becoming something different. She began making independent decisions during combat operations. When other subjects would eliminate all potential threats in an area, Subject 7 started distinguishing between actual enemies and innocent bystanders. She showed mercy to defeated opponents who posed no further danger. Most disturbing of all, she began asking questions. "Why do we fight?" she asked Dr. Park during what should have been a routine briefing session. The question caught him completely off guard. Subjects were not supposed to ask why, they were designed to simply execute their programmed responses without curiosity or doubt. To save humanity from extinction, he answered automatically, repeating the standard explanation that all subjects had been given during their initial conditioning. "But what makes humanity worth saving if we had to become monsters to do it?" Subject 7 asked, her young voice carrying a weight that no 12-year-old should have possessed. The question disturbed everyone who heard it because none of them had a good answer. The scientists, the military officers, the government officials who had authorized the Synthesis Project, they had all convinced themselves that creating child weapons was necessary for survival. But they had never seriously considered whether humanity deserved to survive if this was what survival required. As her conditioning continued to break down, Subject 7 experienced more frequent memory fragments. She remembered pieces of her life before the project, the smell of her mother's cooking, the feeling of soft blankets on cold nights, the sound of children playing in a schoolyard. Each recovered memory made her question more of what she had been taught. If she had once been a normal child who laughed and played and learned about the world, what gave anyone the right to take that away from her? If she had been capable of love and joy and wonder, why was it necessary to turn her into something that could only kill? Dr. So-Young Choi tried to reinforce Subject 7's conditioning through additional psychological sessions, but the damage was spreading too quickly to contain. The girl who had once followed orders without question now argued with her handlers, refused certain assignments, and worst of all, began to remember. Her original identity is resurfacing, Dr. Choi reported during an emergency meeting of the project leadership. She's accessing preconditioning memories that should have been permanently erased. Through the recovered fragments of her past, Subject 7 learned that her real name was Minute G. Seo. She had been 6 years old when government agents came to her family's small apartment and took her away for special testing that would help protect the country. Her parents had been told she would receive advanced education and training that would give her a bright future. They had been promised regular visits and updates on her progress. Those promises had been lies. Minute G remembered her mother crying as the agents led her away. She remembered promising that she would be good and work hard so she could come home soon. She remembered believing that her parents would be proud of what she was learning to do. Now she understood the truth. She had not been selected for special education, she had been kidnapped for a military experiment. Her parents had not given permission for her training, they had been deceived and silently threatened. She had not become something to make them proud, she had become something that would horrify them. The memories came with emotions that her conditioning could no longer suppress. Anger at being stolen from her family. Sadness for the childhood that had been taken away. Fear about what she had been turned into. And most dangerous of all, guilt about the things she had done while under the project's control. Now Minute G faced the most important choice of her short life. She could fight to maintain her conditioning, remain a perfect weapon, and continue serving the purpose for which she had been created. Or she could accept the pain and confusion of being human, even knowing that humanity came with suffering her modified mind had been designed to avoid. The choice should have been easy. Being a weapon was simpler, more efficient, free from the doubts and emotions that made independent thought so difficult. But as she watched her fellow subjects follow orders without question, Minute G realized something that the scientists had never understood. The capacity for suffering was not a flaw to be eliminated, it was proof that life had meaning worth protecting. She chose to be human, even knowing it would hurt. The final battle against the Devour fleet would require a sacrifice that only one person in the entire galaxy could make. Minute G. Seo, who had once been known as Subject 7, stood in the briefing room of the human command ship listening to a plan that would almost certainly kill her. Commander Dong Hyun Yo spread tactical displays across the conference table, showing the massive Devourer mothership that hung in space like a living shadow. The alien vessel was the size of a small moon, pulsing with dark energy that made human senses malfunction just by looking at it. Our analysis shows that the entity's consciousness-absorbing ability operates through a collective network, Commander Yo explained to the assembled military leaders. Every individual Devourer is connected to a central intelligence that coordinates their attacks across the entire fleet. Dr. Park, who had been studying the enemy for months, pointed to the readings on his computer screen. If we can disrupt that central consciousness, the entire fleet should become inactive. But it would require someone to interface directly with their collective mind. And why can only Subject 7 do this? Asked Admiral Jinsu Wang, the fleet commander who would have to authorize such a dangerous mission. Because her unique neural patterns might allow her to survive direct contact with the alien consciousness, Commander Yo replied. Her conditioning removed most of her human psychological patterns, but her recent breakdown has restored them in a way we've never seen before. Minute G understood what they were really saying. She had been designed to resist the Devourer's consciousness-draining attacks. But now that her humanity was returning, she existed in a strange state between weapon and person that might allow her to enter the alien collective without being immediately consumed. And if I cannot survive the contact? She asked, her young voice steady despite the weight of the question. Commander Yo looked directly at her, his expression filled with the grim honesty that military leaders learn to carry. Then humanity dies with you. This is our only remaining strategy. If it fails, Earth falls within days. The other subjects stood nearby, still perfect weapons awaiting orders. They showed no reaction to the discussion of sacrifice and death. Their conditioning remained intact, leaving them incapable of understanding what Minute G was being asked to do. But Minute G was no longer Subject 7. She had become something the project had never intended to create, a human being who chose to be human despite having the option to remain a weapon. The pain and confusion of human emotion was difficult, but it was hers. 2 hours later, Minute G entered the Devourer mothership alone. Her fellow subjects could have accompanied her, but their perfect conditioning would have made them vulnerable to the alien collective. Only someone who had chosen humanity over programmed efficiency could hope to survive what waited inside. The interior of the alien vessel was like stepping into the mind of something vast and terrible. The walls pulsed with dark energy, and the air itself felt thick with the consciousness of beings that existed partially outside normal reality. Every step she took sent ripples through a network of awareness that spanned the entire fleet. Deep within the ship, she found what she was looking for, a chamber that existed in more dimensions than human senses could fully perceive. At its center was the collective consciousness of the Devour fleet, a swirling mass of stolen thoughts and absorbed minds from dozens of conquered civilizations. The moment she entered the chamber, the alien intelligence turned its full attention to her. The contact was overwhelming, like having the weight of 1,000 minds pressing against her consciousness all at once. "You are the incomplete weapon," the collective spoke directly into her mind. "We have been studying your kind. Most are empty shells, easy to consume. But you are different." Minute G felt the alien consciousness probing her thoughts, trying to understand the strange mixture of conditioning and recovered humanity that made up her mind. "Your creators tried to make you perfect," the Devourers continued. "They removed weakness, doubt, compassion, all the flaws that limit efficiency. Why did you choose to reclaim these inferior patterns?" The alien collective offered her something that felt impossibly tempting. She could feel their version of perfection: complete efficiency, unlimited power, freedom from all the pain and confusion that came with being human. They could give her back the cold clarity of her conditioning, but enhanced beyond anything the project had achieved. "Why cling to flawed patterns when you could become perfect?" they asked. "Become like your fellow weapons, but greater. Join us and help us perfect all consciousness in the galaxy." For a moment, Minute G was tempted. Being human hurt in ways that her weapon conditioning had never allowed. She felt guilt about the people she had killed, sadness about the childhood she had lost, and fear about what the future might hold. It would be so much easier to accept the perfect efficiency the Devourers offered. But then she remembered the lullaby her mother had sung. She remembered the 3 frightened civilians she had chosen to save instead of abandoning. She remembered the look in that little girl's eyes, the same fear and hope that she must have shown when the project took her away from her family. "Because," she said aloud, her voice carrying across the impossible dimensions of the chamber, "our flaws are what make us worth saving." Her choice to remain imperfectly human while rejecting the perfect conditioning created something the Devourers had never encountered. The resonance of a consciousness that chose suffering over efficiency, chosen humanity over programmed perfection, created feedback that shattered their collective network. The alien consciousness screamed as their perfect unity broke apart into individual fragments that could no longer coordinate or absorb other minds. Across the fleet, Devourer ships began shutting down as their collective intelligence collapsed. As the mothership began to dissolve around her, Minute G transmitted a final message to the human fleet: "I was trained to be humanity's weapon, but I chose to be its hope instead." She had been created to save humanity by abandoning her humanity. Instead, she had saved humanity by choosing to remain human despite everything that choice cost her. *The end*.